Alright, welcome back. We will be doing the next drawing, which is a tonal drawing. We'll be using the Conte Crayons for this. So I know the textbook does not use those, but it'll give you an opportunity to try a different kind of material that is similar to charcoal. But what you're going to find is the Conte crayons or pastels or charcoal is a little bit different. They have a little bit of oil that's added to the product, so they're pretty much dust free. They don't produce dust, and when they go down on the paper and the material, they kind of grab so that it doesn't go down smoothly, and it's not as freeing on the surface in terms of the blending. So because it's a crayon and that oil, it has a tendency to stick to the paper. So a lot of artists will use this in sketching, like urban sketching or plein air sketching outdoors. It was used in advertising because of the low dust that it produces. But the kinds of tones that you can get with these basic ones, including black and white, but you're also going to have two warm tones. One is going to be the Biester or brown, and then you'll have one that's called sanguine, which is kind of this orange brown. But they're very warm in terms of their colors. In terms of the subject matter, we're going to continue to use the fabric that is attached to a wall with 2 points, just using push pins. Your fabric should have elements of showing taut areas so that they're very vertical, and then there will be some slack because when they're pinned, it's kind of brought together, and so these areas are relaxed. So what this is doing is it gives you a variety of folds that are also not only taut but slack, and this is reproducible or something that you would see on a figure. So perhaps you're seeing fabric on, if we look at Renaissance paintings, where a lot of figures were per se in togas or very long flowing like gowns. But even today, I mean, just like I have a flannel on, and like the kind of folds or the drapery that you're seeing on my article of clothing, this is going to kind of mimic all those versions of fabric with one drawing, okay? So again, your fabric should be attached to the wall so that gravity is pulling it down. Don't lay it on a flat surface like your bed or the table, okay? All right, so then the next part is the paper prep, and the paper prep is pretty straightforward. You're going to have a sheet of your newsprint, or excuse me, a sheet of your sketchbook paper, and then you're going to put your 1-inch blue painter's tape. That will be basically your border. So you're taping that off. And again, the border will afford you a place that you can actually handle with your fingers once your drawing's done, so you're not smudging your drawing. It'll also give it a framing device, and it will look a lot more cleaner. And overall, with that frame, it will look more polished or finished. Okay? All right. So for the starting point, or the next part in the paper prep, is to put down a tone. So you have these two warm tones. We're going to use the sanguine or the Biester to put down that middle tone, or the ground tone. I'll leave it up to you which one you want to use for that. I'm going to use the sanguine, okay? So I'm going to hold the sanguine like I'm going to stroke it using the broad side. So I bring it up to the paper. My hand's a little bit in the way, I apologize. And I want to get it started. So when you first start, it's really not going to work. So what happens is, this product is clear coated with a protective surface, and I believe it's because it's not made here, the protective surface actually waterproofs this, so if it's in storage, moisture doesn't get to it because of that. So you have to kind of break that barrier. I just go off to the side and I actually kind of break through that film, and then I can actually start drawing with it. So I'm going to stroke it down vertically. I overlap my strokes, and this is how you're going to lay down your ground tone. I'm using medium pressure, so that's the first part. Then I'm going to cross it, just like cross contour line or cross hatching, and this will give me a nice even outcome. Again, it doesn't produce a lot of dust, so that's what makes this ideal. Now what you don't want to do is don't fill it in like this. Don't do this, because you'll be really hard pressed to try and fill that in. It'll be too dark, and it just takes too long. So by using the long edge and stroking it out in this manner, it will give you a nice resulting uniform tone for the outcome. Alright, so once that's put in the two directions, vertically and horizontally, you're going to get a paper towel. You can use the blue shop paper towels, or you can use the white kitchen towels. Whatever you got will suffice. Then fold it over so you have like a pad, and then you're going to use this to basically polish it into the surface of the tooth of the paper. So I'm using a circular polishing like means. I'm using medium pressure, and I'm just working it around, and so that I get a nice overall warm tone for my ground tone. And you notice there's no lines, there's no major areas that are of different value, so you want it to be nice uniform tone, and that the fish eyes have all been taken care of. And again, fish eyes are the white of the paper coming through that makes it look like TV static. So if I zoom in here on this, can you see the white of the paper coming through the marks? That's fish eyes. So, and then here on this surface, you see all the fish eyes have been filled in, and it's a nice uniform tone. Okay. All right, so that is your paper prep. All right, the next step, let me back this up so we can see both the drawing and our subject matter. So the next step is to take your viewfinder, but you did this originally in the first drawing, which was the cross contour line drawing, so you're going to use the same position or part of this particular still life. So when I was over here in my drawing station, this was basically about that is what I had picked with my viewfinder. Okay, if we do a landscape, hopefully you can see why I didn't choose a landscape, because this object and the way that it's push pinned to the wall, it's very narrow and vertical. So as a landscape, I have all that negative space on the left and right side, and it just seems like a waste. So as a portrait, to me it just made better sense, and it filled the picture plane compositionally a lot more aesthetically pleasing per se. All right, so there's that. So I found my composition. Now the next step is I want to do the sketch. Okay, and some students will in the past have asked, well, what do I start with, for my sketch? And you have these four tones that you can deal with. So I have black, I have the Beaster, and I have my sanguine, which, there it is, hidden. So here's my sanguine, and then I have the white. Okay, so I have those four tones, and do I want to use them? So the question is, you could use whatever you want, but here's the thing. In my experience, because of this particular material, a lot of times, if you make a mistake, this stuff is really hard to erase. So there's some options that you can do or use, and I think the click eraser affords the best option. So if you do make a mistake, because you're reducing out the line work, the sketch, that if you do make a mistake, you can just take your paper towel that's still dirty, where you put in the ground tone, and use that to erase it back out. So let me show you that. So as I'm looking at my still life and I start putting in my marks, and let's say I do something like that, and you're like, that doesn't look like my fabric at all. You're looking over there and you're like, where the heck did he get that line? That's crazy talk. So what you can do is you can take this paper towel that already has that ground tone on it, and I basically use a circular pattern, and I go over those lines a couple of times, and then they disappear. And that's how I, per se, erase ill-described lines. Okay? Now, if I had done this in the black Conte or the brown or the Beaster, whatever you want to call it, those won't erase very well. That means you have to get an eraser out and make them go away. So I feel like that the click eraser is the best tool to use to create this sketch. All right, so based on my subject matter, and I'm cutting it off about ish, and I'll be doing all that upper area. Okay. So coming back here, again, in the shape layer per se is the sketch. So I find here's where one push pin is. I have another push pin that's higher. I have a strong U shape that's between those 2 points. There's that. I'll bring the camera closer once I have the basics in. And you've all done the sketch up to this point, so I'm kind of making an assumption that you have a pretty straightforward idea of what I'm doing. All right, in terms of the long folds, these ones that are under tension, you're going to find that their edges are straight, okay, because they're taut. So let me show you that. So again, just this outside edge is nice and straight. It's because it's pulling from that site where the push pin is. Now you notice the stuff in the center, it's slack or it's relaxed, so it kind of slumps, if that's a good word. But the outside ones will be taut. So again, those should be nice and straight. You can use your click eraser to find the angle at which these are at. So sighting. All right, we got first shape. Just constantly looking to see where what is where. Piece of fabric sticking out there. Okay, so there's the basic shapes of my fabric, and it's just lines, okay? In a reductive manner, I pulled them out. You know, my eraser's pretty dirty, so this is something I would want to wipe off of my fabric towel, or I could use my paper towel, so just using it. And what will happen is the Conte will actually clog the eraser and it will stop erasing. So just make it clean again, just by wiping it off with my paper towel. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to diagnose my shadows. So I've got this strong shadow right here, and then I have this shadow on the wall over here, and then there's no shadows in the U, so those are good. So coming back to my still life, or my drawing, sorry, and looking to see where those shadows are. They round up and over, kind of like a cross contour line. Then the shadow out here on the wall, I've pretty much cropped it off. I'm going to show just a hint of it. Put that in. Finish off the fabric over there. Okay, so there's that. So that is the sketch or the shape layer for this particular drawing. All right, then the next step is to assess it. And what I'm looking for is accuracy. So just looking, comparing, contrasting, just like playing tennis, just watching. If everything looks good, then you're ready to move on. All right, then the next thing is to move on to the tone layer. And there's a couple of ways to approach this. Typically, a lot of artists will work light to dark for this. You can do it either way you want. I'm going to work light. So for the first part, I'm going to continue to use my eraser to pull out all the lighter areas. Okay? So what I wanted to show you here, I have this white wall against this dark fabric. So I'm going to erase out the wall in these areas so that then it will create contrast in my drawing. Okay, so let's do that first. You can watch that happen. So this all area right here will be wall. So using my, let's use the white eraser. See what we can get with that. Now, if you come to this drawing with a dirty eraser, don't use it. You want to clean that off. So you can rub it on the, if you got carpeting, on your cotton towel, your paper towel. I'm just rubbing it on my shorts, and I get it nice and clean. Okay. All right. So now we're removing or subtracting out. This is the wall space, and you'll notice that as things progress, the fabric will then pop in this drawing just by creating contrast between the wall and the fabric. So coming up to the confines or the outside edge of my fabric and erasing away this warm tone. Coming over here, I'm avoiding the outside cast shadow on the wall. Coming on this side. Okay, I don't want to use my hand to wipe all these boogers off. So again, hopefully you've gotten one. I just have this 2-inch throwaway paintbrush. It is perfect for removing erasure boogers, and it doesn't smear anything. All right, so I keep that handy. All right, so just by doing that, now the fabric has now appeared. Okay, so in terms of my tones, I'm just roughing them in at this point. All right, so don't feel like you have to do everything like with total precision and in a finished manner. In the tone layer, you just want to rough in things. All right, so you just get the basic idea of what's what. Wait till the edges layer to make everything, tight, concise, soft, or hard edged. All right, now going back to my subject matter. On the fabric, this is what I think some students may struggle with, is this idea of what are the highlights on my fabric? And a lot of times that will be dependent on the color of the fabric that you have. So what I have here is I have these light areas of value in this brown that I have, and that's the ones that I want to hit with my eraser. Now, here's where it gets confusing, I think, for some students. This area that's in highlight is still darker than the white of the wall. Okay? But the reason why I want to erase this out just a little bit is so that when I start using my Conte Crayon, I can indicate those areas. So coming back over here to my subject matter, using my eraser in a subtractive manner, I'm going to subtract those areas just real lightly. And then because this eraser does an efficient job at doing that, I don't want to use this one. I want to use something else in terms of that particular one. So I'm going to switch to my pink eraser, because the pink eraser I feel doesn't make things as light as the white one. So I'm just using a dragging, and I'm just slightly lightening these areas. And again, this is so my brain gets the idea. It's like, oh, these areas will be light, so be careful with them. So in a sense, you're almost making like a monochromatic situation. So again, just basic areas. This is all in shadow here, so I'm going to leave it alone. Okay, so that was pretty quick, and you can see that it's real rough, and again, that's what I want. Okay. All right. Now the next step. Now I have areas that are kind of medium, and then I have areas that are really dark. So what I want to do is I want to deal with my medium areas before I go to my dark darks. So I'm going to be using, since my ground is the sanguine, here's the beastry, or the brown. I'm just going to call it brown from now on. And I'm going to do those medium areas. So coming into the drawing and looking to see where those areas are at. So I'm going to do this area right here. You can see it's not as dark as it is here. So it's here, it's a lot lighter. So coming to that area, I'm using a back and forth stroke. The back and forth stroke, I go back over it so I get rid of any back and forth stroke lines. I just want to lay in the tone as evenly as possible. Alright, so that kind of looks like a smiley face. Come back over here. I need to make that a little bit bigger. And then it kind of goes up into this, per se, a corner. I come back over to get rid of my back and forth stroke lines. Again, if you get rid of your back and forth stroke lines, they're easier to blend away when you start dealing with your edge layer. Alright, coming back here, looking to see. So I've got this area right here. See how it transitions into the dark area? So I want to, right there at that transition point, it's not as dark. I'm going in this direction now. Down here is going in this direction. So try and go in the direction that the fold is presenting itself. So put that in. Then I've got, it happens again right here. And you can always control the amount of pressure that you're exerting to get the kind of tone that you're going or getting. Alright, and then it's up here as it goes into the shadow side of this fold. Alright, so my hand may be in the way for this one. I'm going to use a vertical back and forth stroke, putting that in. How hard am I pressing? I'm pressing with light to medium pressure. So over here, if I just, here's light to medium pressure. Now this is a different paper, but if I use heavy pressure, that's going to be too dark too quick. Remember, when you're doing these kinds of drawings, you want to layer up or build up the tone. You don't want to go too dark too fast, because it's always harder to lighten this material than it is to darken it. Alright, so that puts that into shadow. Then there's a little bit on this one. Not much. Okay, returning to my still life. And you can see that right here, this little line, this cavity, it's not as dark as it is over here, so I'm going to do that one. And that's this one right here. Okay. Alright, again, I'm just roughing in tones. Now I'm going to do like the dark delicious stuff. So that's this right here, and then this in here. So those are the two main areas that will receive the black. So grabbing my black, turning to my still life, and then looking to see where those are. Again, you want to be uniform in your application. Now, as this shadow goes over this, I want to use just a little bit less pressure. And then it drops down into the canyon, and I use heavier pressure. And then it rides up, so it's going to be slightly lighter. So lighter. This is heavier. So it goes into that cavity. And then in this fold, it's real dark. So make that dark. Up into the push pin. And then just using less pressure on the top of the fold. Less pressure, so gets that in. Constantly look. This will be just a little bit darker in here. Okay. Turn to my still life. Now I want to do this bottom area. So that would be this right here. Just looking at that shape that that shadow makes. Goes up. This shadow actually connects with it. Let me extend that just a hint. So it's always good to look, make sure. Okay, so in here is the darkest. Then as it works out here towards my light source, it gets lighter. So I use less pressure. Alright, so slowly with these roughed in tones, the dimension is starting to come into play. Alright, other smaller areas to deal with that darker black is up in here, right there, and then these really tight, almost like lines. So I want to do those as well. And by doing that, it's going to help balance it out. So right in here, pretty dark. It's like a slit. Then there's this line. So I'm using the broad side and using it to create a nice straight line. So this is another method that you can do to create nice straight lines just by using or holding your stick in that manner. Again, I don't want to do any details right now, just putting in tones. Alright, now that I've done that, and I've gotten in those tones, I'm going to take a step back, and what I want to do is I have these light areas versus these dark areas. So I want to do the transition in between that. That's where I bring the sanguine back in, and originally the sanguine was used to do the ground tone. So now I'm going to use just more pressure to indicate those areas. Okay, so it'll be like transitions between this dark brown into the light, and etc. So now I'm going to lay in those. I'm using kind of light pressure, and I'm going in between tones, and wherever it's light, I just avoid. Again, looking. Looking. So this would be like on the sides of the folds, right before it goes into the canyon. So it transitions. So as that fold like rounds away and goes out of sight. This area is all exposed by light, but there's just these sort of like small folds or seams that have just slight shadows on them. Not much, but just enough that this will, in a sense, it almost is like detail, but again, I'm still doing tones to show these areas. Transition between this dark and into the light. This is on the side of the fold as it turns in and disappears. Same thing over here. Again, when you're putting this in, make sure that you're uniformly putting in. So if you start to see back and forth strokes, go back over it and tighten it back up so that you don't have any of the light stuff coming through. So you notice that I'm jumping around. You can do that, or you can be real pragmatic. You could start on this side and move that way. You can start at the top, move to the bottom. So however you want to do that to achieve that look. And then some of you will find that it's difficult, that you may get lost. You're like, well, wait a minute, what's this? Is this a fold? Is this a highlight? Is this a cast shadow? Mother, what is this? The other thing that's great is, as long as you're going in this light application manner, the product, it sticks to the paper, but it's just writing on top of the tooth, and then it's easier to manipulate when it's time to blend this stuff in. You know, whether you're using your paper towel, finger, Q-tip, blending stump, etc. Okay, so all my tones are put in, and you notice everything's rough. There's a lot of fish eyes. There's a lot of strokes per se, and all the edges are jagged, and they're not per se rough, or excuse me, they're not per se soft, but they're not per se sharp. Okay, so again, this is just the roughed in the tones. I started with the lights, then I did the mediums, then I did the darks, and then I kind of came back and did kind of the lighter areas. So, you know, again, you can jump around based on what you're trying to do, or you can be really pragmatic about it in terms of dark to light, light to dark, however you want to do that. Again, each method will have a certain way. Okay, so you noticed I haven't put any white in. And the reason for that is I use white at the end after I've blended a lot of this stuff, because the white is going to give emphasis, and I only want my white to happen on my fabric. If I put the white on the wall, what will happen is the fabric will start to look like a part of the wall or more like fabric, and I don't want that to happen because I want the two to stay separated. Alright, so I'm now going to come in, and because these are my tones, I now want to come in, I'm now ready for edges. So I'm going to come in with my white eraser, and I'm going to run the edge. Let me get some tape. I keep having my paper pull up as I'm drawing. It's getting slightly annoying. There we go. So I'm dealing with the outside edge of my fabric, and I'm using heavy pressure, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go back to the white of the paper to give more emphasis to my wall tone, which is that bright white, and then it will be better separated from my fabric. It will also clean up the edge of the fabric. And a couple lines that went out of the fabric. And then going into the background, again using heavy pressure. You will notice that the Conte will stain the paper just like the charcoal, so you won't be able to get really back to the true white of the paper. But this will get you in proximity of it. Again, not using my hand to wipe this, just using the brush. I'm barely touching the paper. I'm just hitting it where it hits the nerds and they come right off. Okay, so this is a little bit more brilliant. And my wall is now separated more. And so I've tightened up or sharpened this edge. Now this edge will get blown out again because when I start blending this, some of the blending will actually leave the fabric and go on the wall, and then I'll just have to tighten it up again, but not a really big deal. All right, so starting off with, let's see what the Q-tip will do. So I'm going to come into the area of the shirt right in here. This is a light area, so right here. And I'm just massaging into the tones to soften up the transitions between each other. So I'm softening these values on this portion of the fabric. I'm going to get my hand out of the way and you can see how that looks. So you can see here it's a lot softer. It's still illuminated by the light source. Alright, let me come back. I'm going to come into, then on top here, riding up towards the push pin. Okay, and then this is going to be, let's show that. So see right here, this is going to be a little bit darker than it is up there. So for what I can do, so just take this and I lightly go over it, and then I take my Q-tip, soften that, and then these two separate. Okay, coming down into this area. Now let's change tools. Let's try something different. So I have my blending stump here, and you notice that it has both ends are black. So you wouldn't want to come into this drawing if you're blending one of the warm tones with that black. You want to save that black for those really dark areas. So what I can do is, since this one isn't as dirty, I'm going to clean this one. So I'm going to first just rub it on my flannel, and then I'll show it to you. So you can hear me kind of rubbing it. Alright, bring it back up. So that's a lot cleaner. Now I can use that end, and these are double-ended, so one will stay dark and dirty, and one will be more suited for the warm tones. So coming into the warm tone area, I'm going with the direction of this particular fold. And I find that this tool is great for when you want to do strong edges. So coming along, so this shape hits this fold, so I'm running the transition between that, and I can sharpen up that edge, and then I can come into the body of it and then blur it. Now it goes dark over here, so I flip it to the other side, the dark side. Come to the dark side. And as I start to blend the dark, I can drag some of it into the lighter area to soften it, transition it. Continuing into the dark area, going with the contour. Hitting this edge. This part of the shadow is lighter, so I'm not using as much pressure. But then here it goes darker, so I'm using more pressure. Light pressure. And then heavy pressure. And this cast shadow goes over these folds and then disappears. Okay, so I get in closer and you can see how the folds are defined in the cavities or the canyons versus the tops of them. Now I'm going to take my black charcoal and I'm going to give emphasis to the canyons and then blend it one more time, and then I'll bring the camera up and you can see that. So I find the canyons and I'm using the edge. Alright, so let me zoom in on that. So I've given emphasis to those canyons. And then, because I don't want to lift them, I'm just going to take my finger, and by doing this, it slightly smooths them out, but most of it doesn't come off. So not a whole lot came off. Come back. And you can see that they're softer so that they transition better. They're not too abrupt. Okay. Let's come over to this side. So over here, I'm going to try this blending tool, so the paintbrush. Let's see how well this works. So coming over the black element here, I'm going with the direction that it's stretching. And then I just stroke in the direction that the fold goes. So I'm almost drawing with this paintbrush. So right here, so see how this is really rough still? So just using the paintbrush, kind of like little half moons. I'm pressing with medium to heavy pressure, but I notice as I get down farther, it's lifting off the tone. So I'm finding that the paintbrush in some of these areas is not too effective. Alright, now going into this dark, dragging the dark up into here, kind of scrubbing it in the really dark areas, seeing how that takes shape. So it has a softening effect, but it also takes a lot back off. So if you really want to make nice, good, soft edges, your paintbrush is really well versed in doing that for you. Kind of avoiding the highlight areas. There we go. Now I'm going to take a step back. You can take a step back with me. And so this is what's interesting about these drawings. From a distance, they look way different than when they look when you're right up on them. So be sure that you're taking a step back, assessing them, and that you're not always looking at them from your drawing distance. You know, when I come back up, I can see the marks that I've made. Again, you're going to be your own worst critic So be careful that you're not self-sabotaging by saying it's not good or doesn't look right. Take a step back. Check it out from a distance. Okay, so I've kind of did that. I've softened all my edges. Now I want to come in and now tighten up edges. So what I'm going to do is, you remember this cast shadow that was on the wall, and most of it got cropped off. I'm going to go over there with my blending stump because it seems to do a better job in dealing with tight edges. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a tone here on this piece of paper. I'm actually going to draw with my blending stump. So I charge my blending stump, and then I come into my shadow shape here, and I'm using very light pressure. And I'm basically drawing in the cast shadow, recharge it. Almost think of it as like an old school dip pen. Dipping it in the ink to give you that cast shadow. And I don't want my cast shadow to look like it has any dimension. I want it to remain flat. So it's really important that I make this tone look flat and lifeless. Alright, so coming down the side, and then that is that cast shadow. Go up close, and you can see that it is pretty lifeless. You can see the outside edge of where the fabric stops, and then it projects that cast shadow. Alright. Now down here, I need to make it darker. So panning over here, so I'm talking about this area right here, it needs to go darker, especially over here. So returning to this, I'm going to bring in the brown using medium to, about medium pressure. Putting in a new layer, so building up the tone to go darker. And as I come over to this side, I use less pressure because it's kind of illuminated till it gets to this shadow because of this taut tube of a fold. Make this climb up a little bit more. I'm going to use my finger for this, going with the direction that it's going. I'm really pushing it in, so that heavy. And then as I come over here, I use lighter pressure. Alright. And then all of a sudden now this pops forward. Okay. Alright, I'm going to come into the dark area, and there's some spots here. Let's see if I can get close in. So right here it's light, and then right there it's light. So I can come over the black with my sanguine over those spots. I just do a light application, just like that. Let me bring it forward so you can see that. And then I'm going to use my finger. I'm going to pull them down. That kind of streamlines them. Then I'm going to do the outside edge on the right so that I can separate. So I know that's real heavy, and you're thinking, my God, that's heavy. And it is heavy. And then I come over it with the brown to make almost another layer transition. And then it makes that edge pop. Boom. Alright, now I'm going to bring the white in. And I don't know what it is about the white. The white sticks are more friable. They always break. So mine was actually broken in the package. So now I'm going to hit these highlights with the white. I don't want to put the white all the way in so that it comes up to the edges. I want to do it kind of as a smaller shape within. So let me show you that. So I have this big smiley face, so I just make a smaller shape within, and I'm looking at my still life where that's at. Same thing here. Giving just a little bit more punch to my fabric. Seeing where these are at. So what you'll find is the white will be on the tops of your folds. And you can kind of see that I've left these areas alone. And I basically just stroke the white within those shapes. Okay, so that wasn't much. Now I don't want to use this finger, it's way too dirty, so what I can do is, that's where that towel will really come in handy, or you're using your paper towel. So I'm just taking my finger and rubbing it in my paper towel in an attempt to get all that black and brown off of it. So I've cleaned it up, and then I just barely touch the white, barely touching it. What I'm doing is because the information I laid down was pretty linear, I want to soften that line so that it looks like it blends or blurs into the fabric. Okay, so just by doing that, and it wasn't much, it made the highlight areas pop. Okay, so this one is still a little square, so I'm going to blur those edges between the white and the warm tone. That's better. Alright, so that's that continuation of the edge layer. Now I want to do my details. So making a decision when I do my details, so let's look at a detail. A detail would be, see that stitch line right here? That would be a detail. The push pins be a detail. Those are the details in your fabric. So that's what I want to kind of focus on. So taking I'm not going to use my black because my black will have a tendency to flatten it. So I'm using the brown. I'm looking. This is kind of a broken stitch line, so think of it as a line variation. And I've got a stitch line here. And this is a little dark, so I change to the sanguine and I do the stitch line using the sanguine instead. It's a lot lighter. There's a shadow behind here. Put that in. So there's a lot of the smaller shadows you can treat kind of like a detail. Alright, and then I want to do my push pins. So that's the white in the push pin. And then I come in with the brown and I do the shadow on the push pin. And the same over here. And I feel like this right here is too strong, so I'm going to tone it down. I'm going to use the brand new Q-tip side, and then by taking some of that value out, and this one too, it tones it down, makes it a little bit more tame. Alright, and then my final thing is I'm going to run the outside edge of my fabric, because in the process of blending it kind of fuzzed it up or made it out of focus. So I want to resharpen this edge. And because the click eraser is more of a precision tool, I can run this edge with a little bit more control to sharpen it up. And then ever so carefully, just taking the nerds off. Alright, let's zoom in on like the details. So there's the push pin. There's the other push pin. So looking at it up close. And then let's back up. And again, it's going to look real different. Okay, it'll look more photoreal from back here, or a closer version of that. Okay, so I have that right there, that detail. I don't have it here, so I need to fix that. So that's another thing that you're assessing to see. And I just need to make this a little bit darker up in here, so right there. So let me put in those details. And that will be done with the brown, because as it comes out it lightens. So I rough it in, and then I just use my finger to blend it. Well, that's much better. Okay, so that's the drawing. Alright, so I hope that the step-by-step video was helpful. And we started off with a blank sheet of paper. Be sure to read the handout and the textbook. Again, the handout pushes this idea of using the Conte Crayon instead of the charcoal that they're using in the textbook. So be conscious of that. So if you did buy the kit, you should have gotten that small matchbox kit of those 4 Conte crayons, and that's what you'll be using exclusively for this tonal drawing. If you didn't buy the art kit, you can buy the Conte. It's not at Michael's, Joann's, or Hobby Lobby at all. They only offer it online. It is at Blick Art, and it is at Desert Art. Okay, sometimes you have to buy it a la carte in their own packages, white, sanguine, black, but they do have it. All right, take care. Thanks for watching, and I hope that this really helped you.